Hello and welcome to Season 5 of the Ebb and Flow podcast with Solomon Ezra Berezin. In this new season, we're focusing on holistic wellness and Hasidic Jewish wisdom so we can each thrive in body, mind, and soul. If you're new to this show, or if you haven't seen it yet, a good place to start is a recent YouTube video or podcast trailer entitled Ebb and Flow, Holistic Hasidic Health. In that video or audio, you will hear all about this new season, who is it for, my newsletter that comes out every Friday, and my coaching services. And today's episode is coming to you from no other place than a Hasidic yeshiva that I'm at. That's a Jewish learning center. Over the past 25 years, today's guest is Nir Moriah, trained and competed at the Olympic level in Taekwondo. He spent the past 15 years studying performance psychology and has coached over 10,000 students. Nir's experience has led him to develop a performance-enhancing method called quantum performance coaching. This method identifies the intangible variables that most affect performance in high-pressure environments. It organizes them into clear principles and provides a tangible process to develop them. In today's episode, you'll hear all about his coaching process, and you can check out more about Nir on his LinkedIn. Please leave a review about today's show and today's guest on Apple Podcasts. Head over to solomonezra.com and follow me on Instagram at king_Solomon8 and Facebook Solomon Ezra Berezin to learn more. Make sure to do something actionable with your learning and be sure to let us know via message or on social media. And if you had a chance to read last week's newsletter, it was the 52nd issue, which means a full year, and I had a giveaway. So if you're able to please write a review, you will be entered into a giveaway and you can go read about what it is. Now onto the show with Nir Moriah. Wonderful to have you on the show today. Welcome. This is the 50th season of my podcast and you happen to be one of the first guests. So thank you very much. And I don't know if I mentioned to you a little bit about the show, but it's called Ebb and Flow, like the Kabbalistic concept of Ratzo V'Shuv. But I aim it a little bit around the concept of holistic health and how do we be in our peak performance physically, mentally, and spiritually. So those ebb moments of life, like part of your coaching, you help high performers really thrive under pressure. And those ebb moments, the things from, just everyday kind of challenges or God forbid, the really tough challenges in life. How do we respond in them and get in our state of flow, that zone that athletes thrive to get into, that nothing phases us, and regardless of the circumstances, we're able to ride the wave per se. So I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself, about your amazing journey from Taekwondo competing in the Olympics, and also all the quantum, as you call it, quantum performance coaching you're doing now. And then we'll move from there.
Okay. Well, I started training when I was 5.5 years old. My mom, I wanted to play flag football with my friends at the Jewish day school that I was going to in Hamden and Woodbridge, called Ezra Academy. It was a Solomon Schechter school, and I think my mom just didn't want me to play football. I don't know exactly why, but she's like, maybe you should get some coordination first. And she opened the advertisement back when there was yellow pages, and then
Wow.
It said Korean coaches and Korean martial art. And so my mom was like, well, they probably know what they're doing. And we went, and I went to first class, and the kids made fun of me the first class. And then I came home. My father's Israeli, and I was crying. I was like, I don't want to go back. And verbatim, he said, you don't even know what's going on there. You've only been there once. Go again. And I was like, I didn't have a comeback. It was a very logical point, and I didn't have a comeback. So I went the next class, and I had a good time. And then I've been doing that ever since. And it started off just going twice a week, which was the normal thing. I have a younger brother and a younger sister. My younger brother is 1.5 years younger, and my sister is 9 years younger. So she wasn't born yet, but my brother kind of started coming to classes with me. And basically I was going twice a week, the normal schedule, but very quickly I was enjoying it. My brother joined in 6 months later, even though he was too young, but they saw, the coach was like, if he can sit here and watch the class the whole time without, disrupting, then he can participate. Yeah. And so basically I started going to class, and eventually we were doing it like 5 times a week. I think within like a year or something. So basically, we would go to, all of the different kids groups, adult classes, whatever we could go, we were going, and just like really got a lot of training. And we just thought they were good. Like we just knew they were good. It turns out later on they came from like a long tradition of coaching from like a very good school in Korea. Like it's set university system there. So basically there was a reason they were good, but I didn't know it at the time, and neither did my parents. But so I started in that in the States, and then my family moved to Israel. I continued my training in Israel, and I started competing internationally. I was fifth place at Junior World Championships, Junior European Championships. I was the Israeli national champion. And basically, when it was time to go to the Army, they had this Olympic program for athletes. And because I was I was the top guy in my weight class, and one of the top people on the team, I got this status that allowed me to continue to train while I was in the Army. So I competed and trained around the world. And then I moved to Houston, Texas. And the reason I moved to Houston was because the best coach in the world happened to be out of Houston. And it was important for me to get an education, and Rice University was 25 minutes away from the training facility. And so I started, I decided to move to Houston. And that's kind of in a quick nutshell, skipped over a lot of steps but kind of how I started in the sport, and then how I got to Houston. And I guess as far as from a performance background, some of the things that might be of interest was one, because there was really no quality or high caliber training in Israel at the time when I was a kid growing up. It's starting to kind of come around now, it's getting a little bit better now. But I had grown up in the States in the 80s, where there was, it was a proud time in the United States, and the notion of anything you put your mind to, you can do. And, the systems were very, kids went to activities to get training, they went to pick up some kind of skill. And so the notion of being, what I had learned as a kid, and what interested me in Taekwondo so much to begin with, was more effort I put into it, the better I got. And that was only because I was in a healthy system. It was a system where there was knowledge. And so the more effort I put to it, the better I got. And I was like, as a kid, I was like, well, whoa, like, this is amazing. Like, for somebody who was aspiring to be their best and just loved challenges, I was like, this is limitless. Like, there's only so far you get good grades. You're only going to second grade. There's nowhere, there's nowhere to go. But in the sport, I was like, oh man, I can keep going, and there's nothing stopping me. So that was what was interesting to me. Unfortunately, that wasn't the mentality that I ran into in the Israeli sports system growing up. It's only now starting to become a little bit more competitive and expecting like achievements. But so anyway, that started. I started traveling around the world to get training, and what happened was I was basically doing, doctoral research without it. Nobody else was marking it, but I was basically. So I had access.
It was part of your own like studying that you were doing the kind of research?
I was trying to become the best ever. Yeah. So I was traveling to where the best in the world happened to be training at it. So there was like some champion in Denmark. The Spanish national team was one of the best teams in the world. Korea is a Korean sport, so they were the best in the world. So basically, I was traveling around the world, talking to anybody I could that I saw that was successful. Especially, I was young, I was a kid, So there was these brothers from Holland, and the fighter from Australia, and the fighter from Denmark, and and I had this kind of, because I was coming from the Israeli system, which was a little bit more kind of like guerrilla warfare. Basically I was funding it and traveling to where important. I had access to really interesting behind the scenes looks. So I could see what was going on from an organizational standpoint at the level of the NGB. I could see what was going on at the level from the coaching. I had access to all these athletes. I had access to the guys that were multiple world champions or an Olympic champion, or the guys who got second or third. So you started to pick up the patterns, just by virtue of traveling the world in different cultures. I started picking up the pattern of what created a really successful athlete, and where the differentiation was. And interestingly enough, the guys who were really separate, the guys who were at the top and consistently on the top, first of all, they were always a little bit outside of what everybody else was doing on the team. And the common denominator was you never heard a philosophy with an excuse in it. So they didn't have a philosophy like well, it's sports, so sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. You didn't hear that.
Yeah.
You didn't hear well, the referees are. You didn't hear excuses.
Yeah.
You heard was a passion for something, and that was basically
like an adaptability, huh? Like regardless of what was going on, like even if let's say a referee wasn't calling a fair match, they just roll with the punches, let's just say.
Yeah, and they were, because of how they were approaching what they were approaching, and because of what things meant to them, they were able to very quickly get to the execution. So it wasn't so much as rolling with the punches as, I mean, in reality, what you saw was people rolling with the punches. Behind the scenes, what was taking place was they weren't even looking at the punches. They were looking at something else entirely. In other words, the information that they were processing was completely different. They were interested in what they were about, what they were there to do, what the competition meant to them, what winning meant to them.
Like within those challenging moments, or just in general, what their mindset was at the whole time.
It was it's like the Hasidic concept of tzimtzumim, right? So what it was at the larger scale, middle scale, small scale, all the way down to an call, basically. So you saw that manifest in very, very small instances. Because backstory, I knew that this was how they were approaching everything, so I could get a sense of what was going on. You understand? So without the backstory, I wouldn't have been able to put all of that together. But because I was basically interviewing these guys and then seeing them in real time pressure, and I had the philosophy of these different athletes from behind the scenes, and then saw what they did under pressure, I could make connections that you wouldn't have been able to been able to make without that information. So
how were you able to take that information and integrate it or apply it into your own life or your own training, and then into the game, into the match?
Well,
normally, like those high performers, they're not as I guess I would say cognizant of like how you had collected the data information. Okay, this is how they're responding, and this is what they have their mindset on. To them, it was just that's what they knew.
So what was the question again? So
how did you integrate it into your own performance on the match?
That's what Houston, actually, because I tried to implement it in the system that I had in Israel. And one thing about confidence and vision is that people that lack it don't like you when you express it. And so I was like, 17, or 18, 19, 20, expressing my opinions. And I the more of a positive vision I I expressed for myself or for the team or for the future, for the more resistance I got, and started to get more and more of a target on my back. And then but ironically in Houston, which was the best school in the world, like just to give a sense of how good of a school this was, in 2005, I was already training there at the time. My team sent 4 athletes to the world championships, like 4 people qualified for the national team. And a full team is 16 players. So 8 men, 8 women. Wow. So a quarter of the team came from my school. The United States won 4 medals at that event, 3 gold, 1 bronze, all from my school.
Wow.
The United States came in second amongst like 190 something countries. In other words, my school was the second best country in the world in the 2005 World Championships, right? So it was like basically I was joining like Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls under Phil Jackson in one of their three-peats. Pick any one, doesn't matter, right? So that's where I was joining, and it was the oldest brother was the coach, and then there were 3 younger siblings, and one of the siblings happened to be in my Olympic weight class. And the day before I flew to the States, we had already met, we had already discussed everything, but I called him one more time because, like, you know, I'd gotten burned a little bit with the Israeli system, and I was like, look, you know, I'm coming to the States, and I'm coming to be an Olympic and world champion, you know, like, I'm going to be in your brother's weight class. Are you sure you want me to show up? You know? And he goes, that's exactly why I want you here. You know, that's the kind of competitive nature we want. And that's the kind of mindset that we want. And people like that around, it makes everybody better. And then, you know, let the best man win. But that's exactly people you want around. And we had there was like 10 people on the team. There was not a lot of people, you know, and there never was a lot of people on that team. But it just to contrast with almost any other team in the world where they didn't want any kind of competition, right? They were trying to actively diminish competition around them so that they could win. These guys were like, oh yeah, you want to kick our ass? Yeah, that's exactly the kind of guys we want. So I was able to, and so it was a lot easier to implement a lot of the stuff there because that was just part of the nature. The nature, confident, the nature was to find your path. The nature was to, you know, the workouts were always more conceptual than, you know, like there was more of an idea behind them. You know, the ideas were a little bit clearer, so you had a little
like
bit
ahead of time, or even just during the training.
The training, just the drills themselves were better designed. You know, there was more of a theme as opposed to a drill. Like,
You share an example?
Yeah. So you'll
like more an intention behind it, like before it even practice began, there was all right, just to get everybody into the right mindset, as opposed to just going straight into it.
There would be like themes to the week or themes to the workout. And the main theme that was underlying all the workouts, no matter what the drill was. So there was one underlying philosophy that went through every single workout, which was the one thing that you can always control is your spirit. So everything else flows from that. So make sure that your spirit is in every drill. So that meant intent, focus. So it went like my coach wasn't Jewish, but eventually, you know, we can get into this, but eventually I started, you know, there was like your neshama, the spiritual component, then your mind, where did the focus go? Which I help with, we can get to also with the performance psychology that, right? So I started to have a sense of mentally where things were supposed to go, emotionally, you know, getting yourself kind of motivated, and then physically would follow. And every specific drill, it was like a puzzle. You had to figure out what aspect of what you were doing was going to lead you to the quality of performance expected. So for example, the drill might be to, you know, you're doing an exercise and it's 25 times, like, or 50 total. So on each side, 25, but you're doing it continuously, and you're like, your lungs are burning, your legs are burning. You're like, what am I doing here? This is a bad, like everything in your body is a bad idea, you know? And there wasn't a specific guideline, do it like this, do it like that, do it like this, do it like that. There was just a standard that you needed to meet. There was a cue for your spirit to be there. And there was like, you better look around. Nobody else is quitting. So get your act together. So, and that was enough to figure everything out. Right. And everybody who couldn't figure it out left. And so it was, and
I kind of want to hone in on it just for a little bit before transitioning to now like you were talking about the performance psychology. but the keep always being mindful of the like where your spirit is. How did you guys practice kind of building that awareness to notice, where your spirit is? How's your enthusiasm? How's the attitude coming in? Because sometimes, and this applies to us throughout the day, to become aware of, I have a down attitude right now. How do I turn inward and connect with that enthusiasm and that joy and that high spirit?
That's a very good question. So two things. First of all, I think it's a lot harder to do on a day-to-day basis just in regular life.
Yeah.
The reason for that is there's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, a workout is a slice. It's
Slice?
a slice of time.
Oh, yeah,
it's
okay.
a little piece.
Mm-hmm.
It has very clear objectives.
Okay.
Right? You have very clear parameters, you have very clear objectives. So, and everybody is doing the same thing and expected to have maintain a certain standard. And there's somebody kind of like a conductor conducting this whole thing to not let you, to kind of like, there's where the normal ebb and flow of human, experience goes to kind of find how you do that. Mm-hmm. Is kind of helping you manage that, right? So day-to-day life, one, you don't have a bunch of people around, kind of with the same
accountability,
goal and motivation and experience. Two, it's hard to cut out those kinds of slices of time in your day. Like, there's a 2-hour workout. It's very clear what the focus is in a 2-hour workout. But what if you're having a bad day? Well, where does that period stop? Where does it start? Can I have a bad day from 8 to 11? Like how it's a little bit harder to find the timeline on that kind of stuff. And three, on the same kind of point is that, like I said, there was a theme to the workout. So you have to be very conscious and clear about, like, let's say there's a very large puzzle of something that you're tackling. Right? There's a lot of components that go into that. So you have to have a sense of what part you're focusing on as opposed to the whole picture. Things that usually bother us or that take us out, make us feel bad and so on and so forth are usually very complicated. It might show up as just a simple emotion. You might just feel bad about one thing that's kind of like triggering your focus. But in reality, there's a lot of things going on behind it. It's a much more complex problem. Although if it was simple, it wouldn't be that, obviously it would be an issue.
I like to say the problem is not the problem.
Yeah, it's exactly. There's something under it. And so the one thing that I did take out of training that became very clear for any problem that I was focusing on, because along the way you see the patterns and you start formulating what in performance psychology is called performance philosophies. And a performance philosophy is basically just a summary of something that is unique to is unique to you or unique to your circumstances or unique to the kinds of challenges that you run into that you can just cue to yourself, as opposed to going through the whole explanation of everything that's going on that might be going wrong. Like, I don't like spending a lot of time in negative emotions. There's a time and place to evaluate that. And there's a lot of positive information if you really look at pressure, pain points, things that are painful or things that are problematic. If you have an honest look at them, it gives you a lot of information. So I let my position to get out exactly kind of like really what's at the root of the problem, and then I shift and start solving the problem. And the philosophy that kind of stuck behind it was basically that if you have a belief, whether it comes from God or wherever it comes from, but basically the notion that things are happening for you, mm-hmm. that I always was like, pressure is basically to push me inwards and like to my essence, and upward to the overarching belief. And so I just, when the pressure came at me, I just went like in to get to the essence of like, why am I doing this? What's my motivation? Why am I, and then upward to what is the principle that is governing what I'm dealing with, and that and the notion that that's it's for you. It help me solve things quickly.
Yeah, and get into that spirit in check, high spirit.
Yeah. So I mean, it's not like I don't experience negative emotions, and I'm always trying to do things better on my own. But there's a lot of pressure that it takes. I think there's a lot of pressure that has to accumulate before it starts registering. So you can you basically you're be able to we're equipped to embrace pressure, right? So if you have a belief system that allows you to embrace pressure and process it efficiently, then you can you can the ebbs and flows of the experience are kind of in a positive framework.
Yeah.
Because
everything ultimately comes from Hashem, from God. So in a sense, when any kind of challenge, or like you're saying, a negative emotion is coming at you, like you said, it's happening for you. So that underlying perception, in a way, then you can look at it. Okay, I'm experiencing this. What is this trying to teach me? What is this showing me? Like you could have a little bit of a performance anxiety, which is, that's we could label an emotion of negativity, although it's not really negative. It's just a preparation. You're getting ready into going into something. Even a little bit I have nowadays. I would have before, when I would play college basketball, and I didn't have the tools to, or at least the tools weren't honed well enough to be able to deal with it. But I even now experience a little bit, just having an interview like this, or giving a speech, and it just shows it's there for you. It's preparation, getting into the actual performance.
Yeah, and the negative emotion, I always, one of the things that came out through the training was I basically recognized that any weakness, you can have a spiritual weakness, you can have a mental weakness, you can have an emotional weakness, you can have a physical weakness. And something that my coach said all the time, which was always, like, I thought is a good metaphor for the relationship with, like, Hashem, is that he'd always say, I don't care no matter how good you guys do, I'm gonna push the limit one more time. So if you kill it all the way up to here, then guess what? Next workout is gonna be, more difficult. In other words, the job was to break you one way or the other. And your job was to, experience that and then and then grow quickly, and so this notion of being comfortable with the uncomfortable was drilled into us. The notion that your spirit has to be there all the time. And so now imagine a focus like that, that's the thought, that's the focus, that's the preparation. Then when you come into a situation where it's just sparring, and it's just fighting, that was always a lot of an easier focus. The training was what was difficult. Looking at yourself, finding the strategies, finding all of the building the skill, building the emotional conditioning, because there's a lot of processes that happen, and you don't know which one is going to happen under which pressure.
Yeah.
Sometimes thing goes off the chart, because why? You're tired, you're hungry, maybe you're cutting weight, so there's like physiologically you don't feel
very,
you don't want, you might be stressed. Athletes are notoriously, especially Olympic athletes, are notoriously stressed for finances. You might be worried about the money that you have to make the competition. You might be stressed about some kind of so emotionally you might not even feel like solving the problem, right? So that could be the challenge. It has nothing to do with how to solve the problem. Maybe you actually know how to solve it pretty quickly. You just don't feel like doing it, right? So that on that day, that might be what the challenge was.
Yeah.
Right. Another day, it might be there's an error in your mechanics and you're forcing it, right? You have the energy, actually, ironically, because you're stronger or in better shape. But now, in order to meet the standard that's being set in this drill that's physically demanding, you're forcing it and you're overriding the technique. So you would have to, there's certain markers. Like my coach didn't do a lot of coaching in the sense that like there wasn't a lot of micromanaging, but simple things like trust the technique. So okay, so you had to, mind you, you have no oxygen while you're processing this, right? Like your lungs gonna be burning. You're trying to figure this out. And you're like, what the hell is this guy, right? And you're like, shit, I can't breathe. I can trust it, but you had no, like, there's no way out, right? What are you gonna faint? Like you don't want to faint. Are you gonna throw up? You don't want to throw up. Are you gonna quit? You can't quit. What am I even? Like, I want to be a world champion. I want to be the best. I don't want to just. Not only that, I don't want to just be getting through this. I want to be killing it.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, within like, a fraction of a second or a couple seconds, you have to process all of that and come up with the right equation to not die in practice. Like that was, so you just got good at it.
There's one thing you mentioned. Your coach kind of expected of you guys to constantly raise the bar, and I wanted to jump right back in it, because one thing I think I put on myself as an athlete was that high standard, but at the same time, it could have been harmful or a hindrance, because then I wasn't comfortable where I was at. So how did you guys, or how did you, maybe he taught that or not, how did you cultivate, like, yes, like keep going, like raise the bar, but be happy, be satisfied where you are? Like,
can I ask what kind of when you said I had expectations, can you give me like an example of what those expectations were? Because I think it might demonstrate like a very important performance psychology principle, and so that might get at that. So
I think it ultimately came from maybe a limited belief of like not being good enough, never being good enough.
But what was the kind of expectation or standard that you would set? So I, like, just verbally, like what was the, you said like I held a certain kind of standard, but I felt frustrated by not being able to meet that standard. So
well, I can't think of an exact thing, but it was always like what your coach was teaching you guys, like even if I perform the best, why couldn't it be even better? That's the kind of like, oh, okay, I maybe scored this many points or did this. Why didn't I also do better in this area, or even in school? So it was perhaps approached in a not the most optimal way, because it is beneficial, and we want that constant growth. How do I perform better? How do I get better? But what I've learned through my own studies of performance psychology or the like, it's not the whole notion of never be satisfied is not effective unless it's like I'm confident and comfortable where I am and I'm getting better.
Okay, so that's, first of all, it's a very good question, and it's something that we would run into all the time. It's something that I ran into, and the performance psychology, which I work very closely with. I think I mentioned off camera, but a guy named John Elliott, which everybody just called him Dr. Elliott or Doc. He's now in what's it called, Texas A&M at the moment. But at the time, he taught at Rice, and he works with a lot of big professional sports teams, and MD Anderson, studying cancer patients, and NASA, and private clients all over the place. And so and he was like one of the top students of Bob Rotella, who's like basically the father of performance psychology, and he was taught out of Dartmouth, which is where Dr. Elliott got his PhD. Anyway, one of the there's a distinction between goals and dreams and outcomes and performance, and they kind of go together, right? So typically what it sounds like you're describing is basically, if I set an outcome, for example, I want to make 10 shots in a row. Okay. And I'm going, well, I only made 7. So that can, in some cases, lead to frustration. Sometimes it leads to motivation, right? If it depends how you're perceiving it, it depends kind of what you're aiming at. Mm-hmm. Now, if the notion is, if I'm focusing on the performance as opposed to the outcome could be like, I want to win a competition. I want to score this many points. I want to do this. I want to go this fast, this heavy, so on and so forth. That's the result. The performance is, what are the targets? What are the focal points that I can focus on when I actually execute? That the more pressure I put on them, the more performance I'll produce, right? So, for example, there's in basketball, a good shooter will pay attention to everything up until the shot, right? Mm-hmm. I can into the shot, and there's a good story. I always forget the name, but this guy, he ended up playing football with the Redskins and winning a Super Bowl with them. So it gives you a sense of kind of when whoever was on that team. And he used to play high school basketball, and he was very good 3-point shooter in basketball. In fact, he shot 50% from the 3-point line, and his team makes it to the high school national finals, and this guy goes 0 for 17 in the finals. He does not make a shot. Okay, his team is playing well, so they're still in it. It comes down to the last play, and the coach designs the play for the ball to go to the other shooter. And this guy, I wish I remember the guy's name. I'll have to look it up. But the guy goes, "Coach, I don't care what anybody thinks. Get me the ball. Scoring the basket." Right. So
was it Robert? The third, what's his name? Rob.
Yeah. Did I tell you?
The guy with the dreads, no? Where did he play?
He's a junior or the third or something. I don't remember the guy's name, but
I know what you're talking about. He played in college in Texas as well, no?
No. This guy must have played like in the 70s or something like that. High school in Texas or something. I don't exactly remember. But anyway, he says to the coach, like, "I don't care what anybody says, pass me the ball, I'm making a shot." The coach, which that's some of the level of confidence this coach had, right? Because he redesigns it, the ball goes to him, he gets makes the shot. They win the championship. Okay. Now, afterwards, the reporters come and ask him, they go, well, let's just call him John for this. He goes, "John, how did you have the confidence to take that? How did you make that shot? How did you have the confidence to take that shot when you were obviously having a horrible game? You know, you'd gone 0 for 17 up until that point." And he goes, "Well, I'm a 50% shooter. Do the math. I'm so due to make this shot. I can't, how could I miss?" Right? And he says that the reporter thought about this for a second. He goes, "Well, by that token, if you had gone 17 for 17, would you have passed the ball?" He goes, 17 for 17. I'm hot. Pass me the ball. How could I miss?"
Yeah.
Right. And so genuine confidence and a focus on the performance as opposed to the result is a place where you're always free. You're always in the moment, and you're always free to kind of put the pressure on that and produce something to rise to the occasion. There's no calculation. If he was calculating, man, I'm a 50% shooter and I missed 17 shots. Maybe I'm not that good of a shooter.
Yeah.
In the comparison to the outcome.
Or even if he said maybe now would not be the best for me to shoot. But
yeah, maybe I'd be best serving my team if I passed, right? But the point was, he took that statistic, which had some value, but he gave it the right. It was a piece of information that he gave it the meaning and the right value.
Yeah.
Was at the end of the day, he's calculating what's going to give me confidence, what's going to allow me to perform, what's going to bring out my best. So that is the underlying belief. That is the mentality behind the scenes that allows him to respond in that situation like that. Amazing. And so anytime you see something in any thing that comes through your day, if you feel that, and it's very easy to evaluate. And the first thing is just to be honest and going, well, what did that produce? If it produced fear, anxiety, or a lot of analysis, negative emotions, so forth. So the first thing is just to assess what it is that it's actually doing, right? Then you can kind of get to the behind of what you're, like what you're looking at. What information are you evaluating and assessing, and then are you looking at it from a place of am I focusing on the performance, the principles that are actually going to produce performance under pressure, or am I comparing it to some kind of an outcome or a result, right? And so, and a lot of times that and I'm jumping here to kind of like the other part said about the difference between a dream and a goal. People that are motivated by dreams tend to think in terms of performance, and by dream I mean something like kind of like Yogi Berra, the famous baseball player, where he had these great they're called yogiisms. I can't hit and think at the same time. 50% of this game is 90% mental. He had an 8th grade education, but the guy was brilliant when it came to performance. And he goes, I just love baseball. So if you're doing something because you love what you're doing, simple passion, there's a simple interest, there's something very simple that has nothing to do with anybody, has nothing to do with anything, has nothing to do with what you're going to get from. It's just purely about the game. The love
was like process oriented, not goal oriented.
Yeah.
Process is like performance.
Yeah, exactly.
Like in a sense, those star performers, they weren't worried about, although they had it sounds like although they had the outcome goal as something to move after or go after, their on the daily basis focus was on the formula or on the process.
Yeah, and that outcome is basically it's in the right proportion, because if you have no excitement, like, if the thing doesn't mean anything to you, you don't want to win, because sometimes people get like, and that's what you kind of like when people go all like ashrami, where I have no possessions, I have no, I've removed all, it's not Jewish at all, I've removed desire from my heart. The Gemara says, you move the Yetzer Hara from the world, in a chicken wouldn't lay an egg, I think is the.
I haven't come across that one.
If you remove,
but wait, it says like at Tzaddik, it says like his heart is void within him. Like they've completely eliminated that ego.
I think that's talking about a different component of it, because that might be from the notion of bitul, which is like you have your that kind of ties into the notion that, again, well, if you look at about a dream is something bigger than you. It's something pure. It has nothing to do with any kind of anything you get. Then is process. It's not outcome, right? Then you have the achievement is always bigger than the result. It's more than it's the fact that you've accomplished, you've expressed your innermost essence under pressure. So in fact, highest level of performance, you're almost not there. If you're thinking of it from like a Kabbalistic standpoint, you're not present at all. You're just doing everything right. And because you're doing everything correct and you're choosing it freely, you're choosing it willfully, it produces this transcendent performance. But the person is almost, once you're in the outcome, what you get from this, what it means in terms of your social, status, or what it means and how good I am or aren't based off of this one performance or this one accomplishment or this one goal that I set, and so on and so forth. The more you think of things in that manner, you're already starting off from a place that you're in the way every step of the way, right? So from that standpoint, yes, there's no Yetzer Hara in the sense that the bitul, there's humility, right? But Yetzer Hara from the perspective of not wanting to accomplish, like you're supposed to be jealous of Talmidei Chachamim that are smarter than you, and that is a correct aspiration. In other words, it's correct if it's at a spiritual achievement, right? But if the spiritual achievement is I want to be considered smart in my community so everybody gives me respect, well, then that's not, then you've switched the value.
There was like a hayom yom, the daily lessons from the Rebbe. I think maybe in the past 2 months, it was something about exactly like you said. Look, be jealous of those ahead of you to inspire, like to grow, and then for those less learned, it should evoke like humility, something of that sort.
Yeah. I know exactly which one you're talking about, and yeah, from a material standpoint, you're supposed to be sameach bechilko, but from a spiritual standpoint, you're never supposed to be satisfied.
Yeah.
So if you're looking, if you're counting how many championships you have, it's tricky, right? The outcome.
Yeah, I was about to say how to apply that to sports, because I've come across that quote from him often, and I've thought about that how it applies to sports, because it makes it's clear when it says, like in Torah and mitzvahs, in spiritual growth, never be satisfied, because there's, like you were even saying with when you're talking about your realization as a young boy, when you were training, you realize there's always a next level, and it's also true in our growth in spiritual growth. But then when it comes like to sports, that never satisfied, is that considered like a physical thing where, yeah, you can be satisfied, or what?
Did you happen to see the Last Dance?
Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember the episodes where Jordan loses in the playoffs? Like he loses to Detroit. He lost it twice in a row, right? It was 2 years back to back. They lose to Detroit, right? And he loses to the Celtics in like early on in his career, right? Do you remember his response to those?
He went straight to the gym the next day.
Yeah, he didn't like it, but if you saw, he was very humble about accepting the results. He didn't question who he was, right? He didn't question what his motivation, what his level of achievement. It just fueled his competitive fire, right? When he won, why was he? You can see his response. He's happy because the winning validates his work.
Yeah.
Fuels his competitive fire, right? The only time he's done is when he takes a break and he goes to play baseball, because at that point he didn't have any more competitive fire, right? In other words, when he lost, it fueled his competitive fire. When he won, he fueled his competitive fire. When his father was taken out of the equation and all of the meaning of what all of this meant shifted, he needed a break, right? And even before, he had already a thing he had set out to. He had a three-peat. He'd beaten Bird. He had beaten Magic. The Dream Team. He had already established for himself that he was the best. Like, so now he has to recalculate what things mean, right? And so, if the aspiration is tied, in other words, the outcome is tied to the dream correctly, then it becomes like the spirit. It becomes a spiritual pursuit. It's like looking at the Talmidei Chachamim and not the Sameach Bechilko. And you saw he was Sameach Bechilko when he lost. It was okay, but it went right back to the performance and right back to the execution, right? Or right back into building the skill, right? And so if you've and this is where honest evaluation of yourself is crucial, because as things are taken away from you or given to you or denied, or whatever, as things unfold, you can see what your natural response is to things, and that gives you your way of checking where you're actually holding, you know. And so that kind of ties back to kind of what we were talking about at the very beginning of this notion of the pressure will reveal where you are, what weakness you have.
Yeah.
Right? Might be a physical weakness, and by that, like there's an error in your mechanics or something, maybe you need to get into shape, whatever the physical cue may be. Emotionally, your motivation, there's something that, like, there's a yetzer hara, there's a very specific kind of yetzer hara, that because there's the notion that en davar omed bifnei haratzon. In other, there's nothing that stands in the way of a person's will, Except there's a Yetzer Hara that sometimes keeps a person from, like he doesn't even want to want.
Indifferent.
Yeah, difference.
Cold,
He doesn't,
cold, totally.
yeah, specific kind of Yetzer Hara. It's like the kind of Yetzer Hara of Amalek, that it
doubt. Yeah.
pulls and doubts.
By the way, for
right?
those who don't know, the translation of Hebrew Yetzer Hara is like what's called the evil inclination, but it's like the ego. It's just that I would throw that in
there. And Amalek is basically the people that represent doubt, or its sole purpose is to undermine confidence and faith. It has no other purpose. Basically, they're there to undermine. It's there to undermine, question, doubt, just for the sake of undermining, questioning, and doubt. In other words, even if you answer the question, you don't get any, you don't go anywhere. And ironically, that's actually a sign of you being at a very high level. And so, if you happen to run into those kinds of, that's a very Hasidic notion that like the Benoni, the guy who's in the middle, that if when davening, he's praying, doubts or things creep into his mind, it's not because he's bad, it's because he's by overcoming it, hating it.
The body or the Yetzer Hara, just because it's so programmed, so to speak, in its ways, it does whatever it can to disturb somebody's focus. So it can bring up or do whatever it needs to, like normal thoughts per se wouldn't bother that high performer. We could say somebody that's davening is high performer, so it has to do whatever it can.
It's got to jump a level. It's got to raise the stakes. And so, but by recognizing that's it's because you're at a higher level, and because that's the process that's for you, then you can kind of embrace it and go, oh wait, I'm not instead of feeling bad, it's like, no, not that I'm doing bad. I have a doubt, I have a worry, oh man, I'm getting a challenge, and by completely negating it and shifting my focus to the right cues, then I can, that's where I beat this, that's where I grow.
That even answers the question earlier when I was asking about how to maintain that high spiritedness even during the day. Because if somebody can realize and become aware of those negative thoughts, or just anything that's trying, the Yetzer Hara trying to take away somebody's focus, whether it's in davening or within the day, and you can become aware of that. Oh, this means I'm doing well. This means I'm doing things properly. That then you can have that immediate or almost immediate shift to where you have those, let's say that despair or despondency, and you can realize, and then just instantly shift and be like enthusiastic within that emotion as it passes.
Exactly.
Cool.
Exactly. The challenge, again, like I made the distinction earlier, which is in sports, you have an organized environment where this is taking place.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky you have a good coaching and good environment and so on and so forth, right? But the main component was that there's this organized slice of time with these clear objectives, right? It takes a lot of focus and discipline to be able to implement that same thing in real life, because you need a lot of looks.
That's even what the Tanya talks about, setting like you were talking about. You don't really like to I don't remember exactly, but handling with the negative emotions.
Yeah, it's a waste of time.
Like he talks about like designating time to look out those, because otherwise it can affect the day.
Yeah, you're like this. Oh, I had a, you don't want it. So it has its time and its place, and so you just have to. But the biggest thing is that when people experience negative feelings or emotions, in an athletic side, we can go back to the Jordan example. He saw that there was a weakness. He was right back in the gym the next day. In summer, he worked on getting better, stronger. He's like, these guys are bullying me. I got to come back physically stronger. It wasn't his mentality that was giving out. He was physically not, so that's a very good example, right? Because obviously he wasn't his mentality. they had a good team. They were already in the finals of the Eastern Conference. It's not like they're not good, but these guys are manhandling him at a time where in the NBA, where you used to be able to kind of touch the superstars, So it required a physical strength and a mental strength. The mental strength he already had. He didn't need to get mentally stronger, but he had to develop physically, right? So normally when people experience something negative, they feel like they're not doing it well. They don't rush into 17 more looks at that same problem. They'll kind of avoid them best they can, try to maintain their own self-preservation as much as they can, and try to avoid that as much as possible. Sometimes they might dose that out and try to kind of like slowly, kind of go back into a situation or deal with it. And this is where faith in Hashem and Hashgacha Pratit comes into whatever challenge you're dealing with. It's going to show up one way or another in whatever aspect of your life. So if you don't deal with it over here, you're going to deal with it over here. If you don't deal with it over here, and ironically, where things mean the most to us is where, like, if you come from a faith-based perspective, that's exactly where God can get your attention, basically. There's a lot,
actually.
He can't get your attention in places that you don't care about. I never had any interest in being a doctor. I don't like seeing blood. I don't like, when they take my blood, I gotta lie down. I don't like, I'm happy that there are doctors. Maybe if there was no doctors around, I might pursue it to save humanity. But because there are other doctors, there's people taking care of it, it's not my favorite thing, especially when you have to, you got to set your arms or whatever, in sports, you're like, I don't like it. So if there's some medical breakthrough, and it's not, if something happens medically in that field, it doesn't mean anything to me. It's not going to catch my attention. It has no interest. It's got no value, right? So what people are, the day-to-day problems that people run into is the things that mean the most to them, and they're failing in some way. And usually it's not a big deal that you're failing. I mean, if you approach it as if it was an ongoing training, a long game, and you're like, oh, I need to get better at this. Okay, well, and you were able to break it down to its performance parts, so to speak, then, okay, well, I can solve this, I can work on this part. When it shows up this time, I can focus on this one. I might miss all the other 9 parts that go into this, but I was focusing on this one part, and I got better at this one part. And ironically, things get solved very, very quickly when you focus on one piece. If you focus on the right piece and on one piece, it's very easy to fix.
Mm-hmm.
If you've seen any Tony Robbins videos and stuff, the one thing that I like when I watch his videos, there's a lot of stuff, there's stuff that I don't like, and there's some stuff that it's a little bit like macheri, but the one thing that I see that the guy does every single time that's very, very interesting is how quickly he solves problems, right? And the reason you solve it, because an honest look with the correct tools at the right problem gets solved like that. Lehavdil elef alfei avdalot, but the Rebbe says the same thing when it comes to the Yetzer Hara. He says, try to pull the rug from under the Yetzer Hara. Like, you don't confront it, you don't battle it, you don't argue with it, you just try to pull its premise out from under him, And so basically things get, ironically, and unless you've engaged in pressure situations a lot, you're not going to come by this insight. But ironically, the things that we don't, that are most painful for us because they mean the most, and usually are very complicated, they last for long periods of time simply because we're not going at them by just solving the one slice or the one piece. And it's never outcome. It's never like, when I get the result, then I feel better. It's, I'm motivated about this result. It means this in terms of a performance or a process or the work that goes into it, which in Judaism we might call the tshuva, the refinement, right? accurate and you're honest and you're consistent, it's ironically very, very easy. So there's this constant dichotomy when it comes to kind of pressure and meaning and performance, that doing it correctly, you're like, oh, it's a cinch. And almost you want more challenges, because the more challenges I get, the better I get.
Yeah.
And this is actually a really easy equation. And you know, it's like what the Rebbe says, within and above at the same time. You kind of, and that's what we might call the zone. You know, like you're pressure. Everybody else is experiencing pressure, but everybody else is experiencing the kind of pressure where it's turning into,
they're submerged by the water, where you're like head above.
Exactly. They're getting suffocated. They're focusing on all the things that we were discussing, the outcomes, the comparisons to the past, to the future. They're not sure where the challenge is coming from. They can't locate the thing that they're supposed to be looking for. They don't even know that they're supposed to be locating. You know, and in the meantime, you got the other person on the other side, exact same situation, but this person is motivated by a dream, by a vision. There's a humility. There's a faith-based process. They're getting better. There's an honest evaluation. They're looking at small cues along the way, and they're like, "Oh, give me more of these, because the more I get, the better I get." Yeah. All these things solved by osmosis.
The whole mindset of the challenges shifts.
Yeah, the whole language, the whole experience. Physiologically, you experience it differently. Emotionally, you experience it, mentally, spiritually, and so, I mean, I summarized and put together a lot of different insights from a lot of different experiences. Started off like from, you know, just being like a 14-year-old kid, you know, in a foreign country, trying not to get my ass kicked and trying to figure out why are these guys good, you know, through the performance psychology and working and understanding the psychology behind it and the science behind it, to the Torah classes, which I didn't get into, but there was a lot of Torah study that went into the process, because I recognized that I need to organize a belief system if I was going to be under pressure on a regular basis, you know? And so those those four components, basically having a clear spiritual foundation, having the science, and then having, or three actually, and then having this training and this environment that I was able to practice things in on a regular basis. And also, not only that, I could see people from all around the world solve the equation the exact same way, right? In other words, I had this behind the scenes look of not only what I was doing under pressure and performing, but what other people were doing. And then you could start picking out, you know, patterns. Oh, the Europeans do it this way, the South Americans do it this way, the Asians do it this way, the Africans do it this way. And then you have kind of like general, you know, you get these kind of like general patterns, and then the individuals from in those environments. How does this specific guy do it? This specific girl do it? You know, so
cool. Beautiful.
Yeah.
So to wrap up a little bit, it's been a lot of fun, by the way. Thank you. I'd love to hear a little bit how you apply all of it into your coaching and helping clients.
So the first most important thing is so the methodology that I basically synthesize from all of these things brings all performance. Doesn't matter which field you're in. Doesn't matter if you're coming as a parent, as a spouse, as a business executive, as an athlete. I always tell, the first thing is to kind of get a sense of what your identity is, because how we process information, basically the premise is, as pressure rises, our performance becomes increasingly dependent on the quality of our interpretations. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what that means is how clearly, efficiently, accurately I process information under pressure is going to dictate how I perform under pressure. And that always comes through three prisms. Okay, one, my identity. And by that, getting a sense of, it kind of ties into kind of what we were saying before about the dream. What is the pure connection that you have with this thing that you're doing? But now it's coming from a sense of, what is my unique strength? What is my superpower? Like my wife, I asked when we were starting today, like, if I asked you, like, what is your superpower? Not like, what superpower would I like to have? Like, I'd like to fly or be able to see through, you know, lead or be invisible.
Yeah.
Not what superpower would I like to have, but what superpower do you have? In other words, what is unique in a way that something that you have that nobody, that like this is me. This is what I'm good at. If you can clarify what that is relative to a specific thing, you have a sense of what you need to be aiming at again and again under pressure. Going back to the Michael Jordan example, what he says, what you've heard this guy say for the last, 40 years was my competitive fire, my competitive nature, right? Now, a lot of people might be competitive, but when Michael Jordan says I'm competitive, everybody knows that however competitive other people are, they're not as competitive as Michael Jordan. Yeah. Because this guy, that's his superpower. I'm not as competitive as Michael Jordan. I don't know anybody else as competitive as Michael Jordan. I know people who are very competitive, but not like that and not what it means to him, right? You saw Kobe, rest in peace, Kobe Bryant, but you saw Kobe and he was very competitive, but you saw he had like a work ethic. What made him superior was he was behind physically when you hear him tell his story. And he figured by waking up at 4 o'clock doing his first workout at 4 o'clock in the morning, if he got more work in, they weren't basically do his first workout 4 to 6, then 9 to 11, then 3 to 5, and then 7 to 9. He was like, I'm gonna have put in so much work, they're never gonna be able to catch up, right? So he separated his pack through the competitiveness turned into effort, which in smart, intelligent. Yeah. By the way, notice the difference if you ever want to really look at a comparison, how accurate Kobe Bryant was about describing his process versus Michael Jordan. He was much more articulate, much more clear, much more precise about all of the steps in the process because you could see that's what made him different. Whereas Michael Jordan, it was his competitive nature that sufficed for whatever it was in his career and in his personality, right? So get that sense of what is unique to you and understand that under pressure, that's what's going to be challenged. It's sticking to that under pressure that you're going to get asked again and again. In other words, doesn't matter what other variables go into it, having that identity, understanding that you have to be true to who you are under pressure, that's first and foremost and really the only thing that's going to be asked. The rest is details, but that's number one. So you're what I call a performance identity. 2 is what I call your performance targets. Okay, a performance target is like what we were saying, the difference between the cue that you're focusing on ahead of time as opposed to the outcome. The outcome is a byproduct of execution, right? You control everything up till you shoot the ball, right? If in interpersonal relationships, I don't control what that person does or says or how they respond. I just can control my intention when I say something. Let's say I hurt somebody's feelings when I'm talking. Well, I didn't. If I meant to hurt their feelings, that's one thing, but if I didn't, then I can always try to correct my communication or maybe a step before that, calm my emotions and remove my hurt or my ego and really think about what is the essence that I'm trying to establish here and communicate from that standpoint. So there might be 5, 6, 7 steps I need to do from a performance standpoint before I get to the execution. But knowing, focusing on the performance and the target where you're at is the second step. And just one more thing on that. One of the mistakes, 2 of the biggest mistakes people make all the time when they're kind of evaluating performance, they either they make a mistake between what's the target and what's the outcome or what's the result. And the second biggest mistake people make is incorrectly evaluating what step they're at. So for a simple example, right? Roger Federer at the finals of Wimbledon, his coach, if he's saying anything, isn't pick your elbow up, Roger, right? Because picking your elbow up is the wrong cue for match point at Wimbledon, right? It's going to be a cue on the lines of where he saw weakness in his opponent, where to put the pressure, what sequence is coming. It's going to be the cue and the focal point is relevant to the step that you're at. And being able to evaluate which step you're at is a mistake people make all the time because precisely because it's meaningful and they want the outcome, they want the result. So they never take the time to evaluate where they're at in the process. So 1 is your identity, 2 is your target, and 3 is what I call your performance routine. And the routine is basically physically, what do I do that kind of combines these two things? And here's the key: in a rhythmic way, in a fun way, in a free way. In basketball, I'm sure you can relate. When a person gets a ball out of rhythm, even if it's a shot they can make, they'll miss the shot. Why? Because it comes to them in a way that they're not used to. There's a thought instead of an execution, and now there's ball, thought, shot, as opposed to ball, shot. And that extra step gets in the way and causes the break in variation, right? And so the physical execution you do to get yourself into the right state of mind, and that you can consistently get a flow from. That's the third thing, because that's what you're going to, in the execution, when you're training and when you're executing, when you're performing, you want to put the pressure on that routine, because that's the thing you have to, no matter what and because it combines the targets and the identity. It's basically, let me stick to this under pressure, right? If going back to a basketball analogy, the Chicago Bulls had like the triangle offense.
Yeah.
Barcelona soccer played tiki-taka soccer. There's a method, there's a way we go about executing, and we trust this method of execution with its flaws. In other words, with its inherent flaws, because nothing is perfect, right? There's no perfect strategy. There's no such thing as perfect strategy. And every time you think there's a perfect strategy, watch, that's when the opponent shows up that this thing's a little bit off. That's when God throws you a curveball from over here. There's no perfect strategies, but it's a humble analysis of understanding this is who I am. This is how I do things. Mm-hmm. And I'm aware of the weaknesses inherent in this, but this is what I'm trusting under pressure. And I can also solve for variables off of that's routine. So when I'm coaching people, I interact with anybody, regardless of what the field is, again, because performance is, like I said, there's performance if you're an athlete, if you're an executive, if you're a spouse, if you're a parent, it doesn't matter, right? Performance is understanding that there's meaning and purpose, and there's something that I want to do, and there's a way to do it at a level. And so identity, targets, routine, those are the things that I always help try to help people to focus on. And ironically, it's easy to say. It takes time to develop and to do correctly, high level. But at the end of the day, from everything I've seen, from thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of either Torah study or performance psychology study, or behind the scenes evaluations and conversations with people, and just seeing years and years of people execute things under pressure, and just evaluating different environments. Also, just for myself, it always comes down to those three principles, which is why I call it quantum performance coaching, because quantum mechanics, quantum anything, is basically looking for the underlying principles that help us organize very chaotic environments. And life is very chaotic. High pressure and performance environments are very chaotic. And if you have the simple principles that help you organize that information, then you have now you have at least a map where you're not just in the dark. And really, that's all we can do. That's doing our best, And so that's my take.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Nir. It's a pleasure to speak with you and to learn all that you've harnessed from your own training and then coaching. And I'm so honored that we've been connected. So thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. How can people learn more about what you're doing? And then you have a couple articles on LinkedIn. Highly recommend checking out. But I'd love to close out with hearing how people can get in touch if they want to reach out.
Reach out through LinkedIn, or you can reach me at Nir Moriah at hotmail.com. And I'm happy to talk to any of your viewers. I was very happy to come on the show. I love talking to people from a similar field, because they ask good questions, and every time you're asked to speak or to talk, it forces you to kind of organize things and articulate things, and so it's like a training exercise for me, and also you never tell the story the same way. Yeah. So it was a lot of fun, and it's been a while since I brought everything up. So thank you for the opportunity, and I hope it's what everything I shared was as helpful for you as going through the exercise was for me. So thank you for having me on.
Sure. For sure. Have a wonderful week.
Okay, Shabbat Tov.